Conversations with Enid Lee around anti-racism. This is our second conversation with Enid, and with this conversation, we're going to be discussing checking your systems for equity. Um, this is the second conversation with Enid in a series of three, and we're going to go deeper into the concepts of anti-racism in terms of systems and systems work. These conversations are sponsored by the Educator preparation programs with the Santa Clara County Office of Education. Um, these conversations are specifically part of our Educator preparation program's focus on inclusion, equity, and social justice. Uh, our education preparation programs offers credentialing, California credentialing for special education and for administration. So teachers who are interested in becoming special education teachers, we have credentialing programs for them in mild, moderate, moderate, severe, and early childhood. And teachers who are interested in going into administration or becoming site administrators, we offer both a preliminary credential and a clear credentialing program. We're happy to offer these conversations with Enid. We have the pleasure of having Enid teach in our preliminary administrative services credentialing program. And Enid has also been a contributor to our curriculum as well. And so we're really grateful that to have her contributions to our program, as well as to sponsor these conversations with her. I'd like everybody to take just a moment and in the chat, please say who you are and where you're from. Um, with our last conversation with Enid, we had people from all over the world. We had folks from South Africa, from Trinidad Tobago. We had people from Europe. And so it's really nice to come together and hear where we're all coming from, sharing the same concerns and issues around anti-racist advocate work, as well as our equity work. Um, I would like to take a moment to introduce Enid as well. Enid has a long 35-year history of anti-racism work. Um, Enid has been doing this work all over the world. Enid comes to us from Canada, where she is well renowned throughout Canada for her work in anti-racism. She has worked in all over the country um, in doing anti-racism work. Um, some of her most recent work has been in the state of in Washington D.C. actually, with the Smithsonian Institute, and she may at some point tell us a little bit more about that work. So 35 years, several books she's written on anti-racism work. She has worked with the New Teacher Center on their work around coaching. She's done extensive work incorporating anti-racist and equity work in the field of coaching. And we also use some of her work in our curriculum in our coaching classes with our preliminary program. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to Enid Lee. She is an amazing individual, as you will see at the conclusion of this conversation. I do want to let you know that in between Enid talking, we will stop for audience interaction, comments and questions and thoughts. So always know that if you have something you want to say, either hold on to it and we may call on you, or you can always write it in the chat and we'll read it out loud. Um, Enid, it's all yours.
Thank you very much, Adora, for this invitation, and welcome to everyone who has joined us for this second conversation. I was looking at the participants list and I see friends and colleagues from far and near. I've seen people I've worked with in schools here in California. I've seen friends from across the country in Boston, Massachusetts, and so on. And I'm delighted that we are together for what Adora has rightly described as a conversation. And I just want to remind you that a conversation is a two-way affair. So I have no intention of speaking at you for the next 50 minutes. That is not the plan. I am looking forward to hearing and sharing what you've been doing, what obstacles you've faced, what opportunities you have managed to carve out for addressing questions of racism in the work you do in other areas of your life. So it's going to be a conversation, and I'm very glad that you have been encouraged to write in the chat, because that's one of the things that I will be looking at and counting on you to do this. Lots of friends I'm seeing: Hayward, Oakland, all over the place. This is wonderful. So we should have stories from all of you and from all those places, because the plan that I have this afternoon is to share my process and say, this is how I prepare myself, this is how I do my work. And here is a tool that I've used and others have used, and some of the results of that tool. And I want to invite you to share what you've done, what you're facing, as we are in this time of national reckoning on race. And reckoning does mean to count up and take note of what in fact has happened, what is happening, and we have a long road ahead of us. So this is a time for us to share our resources and strengthen each other as we engage on this journey that so dehumanizes human beings and limits what we can do in terms of teaching and learning, particularly in this time of the pandemic. It's relevant. So that's the purpose: sharing what I've been up to and what I've used and who has used it, and inviting you to share your experiences. That's the plan. I'm going to ask you, as I usually do before I get going, to share, just let me know if there's what specific things, a few specific things that you have on your mind this afternoon. And the way I'm going to ask you to do it is write in the chat, and then Adora will ask people to raise a hand, and we'll get a few comments, a few questions, a few thoughts from you. So right now, questions, a few questions that you may have brought, and then we'll hear your voices with that.
So I will call on people. If you could raise your hand, if you have some thoughts or some ideas or some questions that you come to this conversation with, um, please raise your hand or write your thoughts or ideas or questions in the chat. And this will help us get started with our conversation. So Mary Rodriguez writes, the impact of Black Lives Matters on our school community and opposing points of view. So I'm assuming, Mary, could you raise your hand? Would you be willing to expand on that a little bit?
Hi, yes. Is it okay if I just join in?
Please.
Yes.
Okay. So I'm a principal at an elementary school, and our district passed a board resolution around Black Lives Matter, which is, I think is absolutely a good thing to have done. We do have teachers, and there's been lots of information in the news from all across the country about whether teachers can wear Black Lives Matter shirts or support the movement, etc. And so since we have a board resolution, it's pretty clear in our district that our teachers can support that movement as long as it's in a non-political way. However, I did have a family reach out to me because their child was really uncomfortable with the Black Lives Matter poster in the background of the teacher's classroom and brought it to her parents' attention. And her family's in law enforcement. And so her experience with the Black Lives Matter is from that of being really worried about her father when he goes to work during the recent and past, situations and, just everything that's been going on. And so it was just a really interesting situation to be in, where the purpose, the teacher's purpose of putting the Black Lives Matters poster was to make all students feel safe and really let that be kind of out there. But there are students for whom that has the opposite effect. And so how do we effectively talk about that? And I don't know if anybody else has had experiences with that.
Okay.
Thank you, Mary.
Yeah, I certainly will address that in the process of what it is I have to say, and invite others to share, because there are some teachable elements of that case. Okay.
So Diana writes, organizing students to combat racism in their schools and classrooms.
Mhm.
Diana, if you're willing to expand on that just a little bit.
Sure. We have done some pretty amazing work in my school district. However, a piece that has not been fully addressed is engaging the voice of the students, and our students, at all levels, or even our elementary students, are expressing a desire to take action, to be proactive in terms of anti-racism work. And so I'm wondering what Dr. Lee's thoughts are about how you go about organizing that work with students.
Okay, Diana, I know that I know you're doing a lot of work in Hayward, right? Around that. Am I right?
Correct.
It's Hayward.
Correct.
Yes. Okay, all right.
Yes.
Yeah. So we will touch base and see how far you have got with it, because I know things have been started. Right.
Thank you.
So Patricia brings to us a broader question, which is interesting. Concerns around the resistance to recognize the need for a systematic change in education. We need to make changes that positively impact the life of all of our students, including those who are always left behind.
Okay.
Patricia, would you like to expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, and thank you all for sharing. Thank you, Mary, because actually, as I'm writing, my comment is kind of tied to what you are sharing about your parent being concerned, and that is the problem. People keep responding against making us aware of this reality, and parents keep pushing back. They don't want to see it. They don't want to see a reality. Some parents, and I think we have to push back and really make the point, because we gotta make the changes for the children. And some of you are writing about online learning, which we know is not working for our children, especially our children of colors or those who are low socioeconomic, or children in poverty. This is not working for our students. So my concern is it's about that more of the systematic change, and we stop and then discuss all this resistance, and then that doesn't allow us to move on. I don't know if I have expressed, there's so much I want to say, but I don't want to take airtime, but it's a concern of mine.
Okay.
Thank you, Patricia. And then lastly, we have Jeanette, who talks about something all people in education are experiencing right now: equity in distance learning. This year we are teaching the family, not just the student. Good point. Thoughts on how are we building relationships with families and students in a virtual environment. And Jeanette, if you want to just briefly expand on that a little bit.
I think, hi, hi Enid.
Hi, how are
We're one
you?
of the we were one of
Union,
the
New
schools.
Haven, right? New Haven.
Yes.
Mhm.
We have a couple New Haven people here,
Yeah.
and just thinking about the work that we've done so far with our families, it's and also what Patricia was saying a little while ago, we're in a place where we're not quite sure, like, how do you reach across the screen and try to touch that family and try to support the family. Some families are, some of the barriers might be um, the Wi-Fi issues, or it's hard to hear. Um, so there's a lot of things going on in virtual learning. How do we support the family in the midst of everything that's going on, social emotionally as well as academically?
Okay. Right. Well, we'll think we put our heads together and see what we can come up with. I'll share what principles would guide that work and invite others to look at to share what they have done and are doing. Yeah. So those are all important questions as we address this. In fact, the fact that we have these questions is significant because it means that we're doing the work. We're attempting to do the work. You know. Um, this work is not easy. We shouldn't expect it to be. We should anticipate resistance, and sometimes the resistance gives us a sense that we are moving in a direction that will make life more just, more equitable for others. And so, how do we prepare for that? Okay, so I think with those questions, I'll get started on the process I have in mind, and integrate those questions in what I have to say. And if I haven't dealt with them satisfactorily, fully, in the break, I will talk about them directly. So I'm going to share my screen now so that I can get started on the process, but those questions are very welcome. Okay. All right. So I'm going to take a few, maybe 10 minutes to share the process that I engage in as I prepare for this work. Thought it might be useful to do that, and also a tool that has been helpful, keeping in mind the kind of things that you have asked about. Okay, so why is this not moving? Yeah, all right. Okay. So the very first slide that I'm showing you here is of a educational set of cards. Some of you are familiar with them, called Checking and Changing My Systems for Equity. That's the card, the cover, and it contains 54 cards with about 100 and a few questions that are intended to help us think about and prepare for and reflect on doing equity work. And today I want to focus this on racial equity particularly, because the cards in general, the cards in general are not, the cards are on equity generally and sometimes on different aspects of equity, but today we're going to be focusing on racial equity with what we have in mind. And the card that perhaps is most useful in all of this is the preparation card. There are three cards that separate three systems of the work. So there's preparation, there is teaching, and there's reflection. Those are the three. Those are the three systems. And one of the things that has happened as these cards have been used by others is that people have tended to deal with the teaching card first, and the preparation card doesn't get addressed. So I might arrive at a school and I'll be talking with teachers, and they say, "Oh, I tried such and such from the teaching section, and it didn't quite go as well as I had hoped." And I would say, "Well, what about the preparation piece?" And they said, "Oh, we skipped that over. We went straight to the teaching piece." And that's not uncommon given how much we have to do and we want to get on with this. And in a way, the fact that the preparation piece is often missed is somewhat related to the questions that have been asked this afternoon. Like, we are, for instance, what is it that we need to do as we embark on an initiative such as like Black Lives Matter in our schools, knowing that that is a fundamental challenge to the status quo. I want to put that out. So what is it that has to happen in our own personal preparation and also preparation of staff and district people as a whole to do that? And it doesn't mean that because you have prepared carefully that you still won't get resistance, but at least some of it would have been anticipated, and we might be in a better position to know what to do when a particular family or groups of families speak up to us about it. So a quick word on how I prepare for this work. For me, it's ongoing work. It's constantly building my knowledge and understanding and will to do this work, because in many ways it is dangerous and daunting. And so one of the places I look often when I'm getting myself ready for it, which is every day, is what are the broad patterns of racism? What are the expressions of racism in education, in law enforcement, and so forth, so that I'm clear that this is not a simple episode, but that is a system. That's one of the things that I keep thinking about. And for that reason, I listen to and read and pay attention to any source of knowledge that helps me to get to the roots of racism, and people who speak about it as a system as opposed to an episode. One of the things I think I mentioned last time was that I listen to Democracy Now! Every day, because there I get two sources of information. One, it's the up-to-date analysis of the racism things on racism, and I also get stories of resistance. I get examples of people organizing themselves to resist that. So for me, preparation of that ongoing nature, and it will never be enough, let me say that. History is another teacher of mine, and then also listening to the voices of teachers in an applied way. So I want to say that any person who is working on this question, and we all should be working on it, should be looking at how we prepare ourselves. And an example that comes to mind, particularly around the parents with opposing views, I would suggest that you have a look at, if you haven't done so, at Louise Derman Sparks' anti-bias curriculum for young children. It's an early childhood piece, but she has a very profound piece, in my view, on working with parents. And, we can put those references in the, later on the chat. But she has a piece dealing with how do we work with parents around addressing racism in the schools if they're not on side with it. And it is to be expected that many parents will not be on side for all kind of reasons. So the preparation is clearing one's mind, and building up the information that we need to have. The teaching piece is the action piece, which we know a lot about. And one of the things that guides my practice is the business of differentiation. In education, we know a lot about differentiation when it comes to instruction. I think we also need to look at differentiation as we address other aspects of our work. So for example, the question regarding the distance learning, what do we do with different families? And I think that we need to have a differentiated approach, and in some cases we do, a differentiated approach to how we deal with questions of family and school engagement, whether it's a question of the device that's not there, or families that we have not engaged with. And so now that we have to actually be thrust into their homes, because that's what distance learning has done. It has put schools and homes and families into each other's faces in ways like we can't believe. And now we say we don't know the family. We know them perhaps more than we want to know them, and they know us perhaps more than they can stand. But I think this is a unique opportunity for us to reimagine and research and re-engage with families so that some of the things that appear not to be working could be different if we had a different sense of families' realities, if they were free to be truthful to us about what exactly it is they're dealing with, and to give them space to do that. So the application piece, and then of course the reflection. So those three stages need to be part of any process we're engaged in terms of anti-racist practice. And if you haven't done the preparation piece, go back and retrace your steps and see, what do we need to know about the families? What do we need to know about the context? What do we need to know about the history of policing in this community? What do we need to know about what stance the school has taken with these matters? So that's it. And just before I leave off the Black Lives Matter thing, I want to say very quickly, I've been in schools where the Black Lives Matter week is being done. And when I ask about what the Black teachers or Black support staff in the school have to say about it, I don't get an answer, because sometimes those programs have been, gone through full speed without consultation, without input. So I just want to say we need to think about that. Okay. The other thing that is important in terms of preparing, and I'm leading up to the cards because this has to happen. We get into deep difficulty when we are not having a shared definition of words like racism and anti-racism. So I just want to remind you, a way of preparing is to be sure that we have a working and agreed upon definition of racism. And at the basis of it, we have this idea of opportunity, the question of power, the question of value being placed on people. And so just to link it to the issue that was raised about Black Lives Matter or whatever group, Black Lives Matter, and also in terms of the students wanting to be engaged in anti-racist practice, I think if we take Kamara Phyllis Jones's working definition on racism, we could go far with this. And she talks about racism is a system of structuring opportunity and assigning value based on the social interpretation of how one looks. And I want to just comment on the assigning value piece, because that would be a way of including everyone. So for example, the idea that all of the students, all of the families, all of the people who work in our school, we want to be clear that they are valued. And any practices that work against their being valued and against having opportunity, that's what we are doing when we dismantle racism. Putting it in those terms, value and opportunity are two words that should have good quality, they should be acceptable in educational terms. They don't sound overly radical. However, when you think about the question of assigning value on what people look like, race, and the advantages some people have based on that, you will see that it will be hard to say this is what we should be doing. So part of the answer to what we are talking about is how we put into educational terms things that have to do with anti-racism. So Kamara Jones, who speaks on these matters as a health professional, talks about it, the advantage to some, the disadvantage to others, and the way in which this practice limits all of us. So I would take that approach in working in the school in saying some are advantaged directly, some are disadvantaged, but all of us are limited because we are not allowing everyone to bring their full selves to the table and to learn. So over the past 35 years, I have used many different definitions of racism. This is the latest. And I change them based on what's happening and what seems to say most clearly what I believe in. And I need to point that out as a way of getting to the cards. And not only what racism is, but what anti-racism is. And you might wonder, well, why is Enid referring to Kamara Phyllis Jones so frequently? Well, what I tend to do, I look at both what people say and what they do. So last time I used the racism, Kamara Jones's definition of racism last time. And then just this week, when I was listening to my favorite program, Democracy Now!, there she was talking about anti-racism with respect to the vaccine question and who should get it. And you see, for me, anti-racism is not simply a theoretical matter, an ideological matter. It's an applied field. And I tend to listen to people who put anti-racist principles in their practice. That's why I quoted her twice, because she talks about what racism looks like. And then she says that anti-racism is about the opposite, valuing all individuals and communities equally, recognizing and rectifying the wrongs that have been done, and providing resources according to need. So I could see that frame helping us in our conversation with both students and families and staff in terms of what anti-racism is. Okay, and then when I stop, you can tell me whether that makes any sense to you. But just to tell you, framing definitions are very important. And I'm going to go on to just look at 2 more slides, then take a stop before I do this, the actual cards. When 35 years ago, yes, when I wrote my book, Letters to Marsha, A Teacher's Guide to Anti-Racist Education, I simply wrote that the aim of anti-racist education is the eradication of racism in all its various forms. That's what I thought I was signing up for. And of course, it gets much more complex than that, but that's the purpose. And I would keep going back as I'm trying to bring others on board about it in terms of anti-racism is the eradication of racism. There was a time when people would say to me, Enid, I don't like the word anti-racist. It sounds too negative. And I would say, stop and think for a minute. What's the opposite to anti-racist? And of course, the opposite to anti-racist is racist. And I said, do you prefer that? And of course, we could take a different path. So anti-racist is a positive strategy in order to address the ways in which people and communities, based on what they look like, have been devalued and denied opportunity historically and in the present. So definitions are important. These are the features that make a difference to me when I think of anti-racist education. When I think of it, it should be applied. It should be something that's dealing with what we're dealing with right now. It should be relevant. It should be assets-based. It has to do with things that are our strengths that we can work on. It's systemic, right? And by systemic, I mean that it runs right through our whole body as an organization, as a school, as a country, as a nation. It's not an episode. We rely on history. We deal with equity. We focus on outcomes. We're collaborative, and it's ongoing. And when I go through the slides, you will see how we try to make that happen. Okay? This slide, which is one that must frame our work, is a definition of system. It's a very simple definition of system. It says it's a set of connected arrangements or regular procedures that form a whole and work together. So if we're going to have a school that works for all students, there are all kinds of pieces that must be connected, including how we alert families that this is what we're trying to do, how we solicit their aid in helping us to do it, how we deal with their fears about what we're doing, how we measure the impact of what we're about. And I have come to use the word systems a lot in my work because for a long time, I've thought about systems as a big, global, heavy mechanism that oppresses people. And it certainly is that. But there are also systems that we're in control of in our teaching, in our service provision, in our coaching of administrators and others that can allow us to interrupt racism. So part of a system that a school should be in, both taking into account the relationship building with students and families, taking into account what we have to do differently because of the distance learning, taking into account what we do when we undertake something as brave as Black Lives Matter. So my question to you is, what system is in place in your school, in classrooms, in the district that would allow us to get the message out that would challenge racism? And it's a set of connected arrangements. And those connected arrangements could be like, how do we send messages home? What language? Who takes the message? What contact do we have with families before we have to send them news about something like Black Lives Matter. One school I worked in, there was a part of their system was that every family was connected with about good news on their child's performance before anything had to go home that might be distressing or disturbing. That was part of their system. It was focusing on assets. In fact, another part of another person's system was to send a message to families first day saying, "Thank you for sending me such wonderful scholars, because you have made it possible for me to work with them." And this is before they even knew the kids or knew what was going on. So I'm just wanting you to think about arrangements or procedures that can help us to, challenge views, to deal with resistance. And I'm going to say one more thing here. And we often talk about gaps in our work. We say there's an achievement gap. And I have argued and continue to do so that the gap is not in the person, it's in the system. The gap is in the way in which we have nurtured or not, in which we have attributed value or created or not, or produced opportunity or not in our system. And when we turn the gap into a goal, when we say what we're going to do is take this gap that is there because of how we have worked, like information, how do we make that a goal? How do we bridge the divide and make the connection? So systems, gaps, and the last one is history, and then I'll stop. And yeah, let me just see where we are. Yeah, just a minute here. Oh, okay. History. A quick comment. Oh, Demi. Just want to. Yeah, yes, the hand of history, very important in doing our work, because if you don't know where things have come from, if you don't have a sense of how different organizations have been set up and the purpose that's been set up for, then it's hard to know, to understand what's happening. And some of the mistreatment that we experience has to do with cues that history has given us about how to treat each other and how to treat based on the power relationships that we have. So history is one piece, and I won't dwell too much on it. I just want to also now just talk about equity. Equity as the path to redressing wrongs. And so in justifying, explaining why things have to be done the way they're done, we have to look at the inequality that currently exists. And equity means practicing and undoing and redressing inequities in schooling and society to ensure that everyone experiences equality. So again, if young people in school are trying to be activists, the question is, what's the inequality? What's the unfairness? What's the injustice that we can fix, that we can address to make more fair? Okay, I'm going to stop at that point just for your comments and then show you the cards, the tools. Please, let's hear your voices.
Enid, could you stop sharing?
Yes.
So that you can see all
yes,
the.
I will do that. Yeah. Yes. I'd like some responses, some comments, some pushback, some whatever. Okay? I wanted to frame it.
Start with Mary Rodriguez.
Yes.
He writes in the chat, you mentioned a shared approach to creating a working definition of racism and
Yes.
anti-racism.
Mm-hmm.
You have suggestions for how to engage the community in this process.
Okay, thank you. Let me respond directly. So Mary, I would, as a teacher, I would start by asking people, this is the question I ask, and you can tell me if this would work for you. I would say at a gathering, small group meeting, whatever it is, what images come to mind when you think of the word racism? That's how I would start. And I would have people talk in pairs if they're a little reluctant to be public about it. If we're dealing with people who maybe don't want to speak, but to draw. So my starting point would be their images, experiences, understanding of the word racism. That's how I would start. And then in most cases, I find that I have to extend it, radicalize it, and take it to a root, get to the roots of it. I usually find that the answers I get are more dealing with episodes than with systems. And so I would make a bridge between where that the episode, the nastiness, the interaction that's hostile comes from a bigger place than just that one individual, but it has to do with the power that that individual or that institution has given and has allowed for that to happen. And so we would look at questions of power. And by power, I'm talking about the ability to make things happen simply because you are in charge or that you have the dominant voice. But my starting place would be their own experiences, and then I would take it further.
Mary, would you like to respond to Enid's answer or expand on the question?
No, actually, that is very helpful. Thank you.
Oh, good. I'm glad I hit the note right. And the principle behind what I'm saying is that you always start with the experience of people, right? And especially if people who think they may not know the answer, because that question has no wrong answer. The question is, what comes to mind when you think of or hear the word racism? And everybody's answer is correct because it's what they think. Okay. And then I would extend it, you know? Yeah.
Any other comments or questions? If you could raise your hand
Yeah.
and I will call on you.
Mm-hmm. No other question?
I'm not seeing any other hands or questions in the chat. You can also type your question in the chat or your comment.
Okay.
Okay, we've got some raised hands.
Okay, yes. Mm-hmm.
Let's go to Dean Trejo.
Hi, how are you? I might tag one of my colleagues, Ms. Rivera, Ms. Shani here. We have our equity task force team, and we're attempting to accomplish all that we can while the pot is hot and we're all engaged. And so one of the hot topics that we currently have is how do we move our district forward to implement an ethnic studies class?
Okay.
So I already heard a board resolution, but what is a good strategy to be able to accomplish this rapidly?
Rapidly, okay.
I know change takes time, but
Yeah.
I'm quite impatient, and our team is quite impatient.
Two things come to mind. Again, I always like my starting points are always, what do we have in place now? One, like what's the state of play in terms of ethnic studies in any form or fashion, right? That I would find that out. That would be my first question. I would also have in hand the interest of students who want it, right? I'd get that, get their input, who has been asking for it, who wants to learn more about what, and get a range of things. Do a focus group with kids, get that. So you have that. So this doesn't become just some adult thing that somebody's pushing. I would go to the students and say, have history, social studies, whoever. What is it that you would like to know about who and what and so forth? Second point. The third thing, I would look at 2 or so other districts that have had ethnic studies implemented, because there's history with that. Again, history. I'm thinking about some things that have been done at New Haven Unified School District around that. I think about the work in Arizona, a video that was done about the ethnic studies struggle I'm pretty sure it's Arizona. I can check it.
Precious knowledge?
Excuse me?
Precious knowledge?
Precious knowledge, yes. Is it Arizona? Am I right?
Yes, you're right.
Okay, good. Yeah. So I would look at precious knowledge. I would find out who, what neighboring communities have had it. I would ask the students. I would get their input on what it is that they want to know. I would have a picture of what we're looking at, and I would deal with what we have in place already. Those would be my 4 approaches. And I would work with as many people as possible on that. Yeah. Okay.
So we have, we're going to go to Rosalinda first, then Diana, and then Noni.
Okay, and then yes. Okay.
So Rosalinda.
Yes.
Are you there, Rosalinda?
Maybe she fell off.
You said everything I was going to say when I was thinking about ethnic studies, because it's true. If we showcase some of the very successful programs and the effect that they have had in academic achievement. So they don't seem as an extra or an added,
Right.
but on the contrary, if we want to, like, fill up the achievement gap, or which I call the opportunity gap, which again in it you kind of talk about it too.
Yeah.
Ethnic studies has been very powerful for that.
Yeah.
And I also just wanted to say in it that I really appreciated the model that you laid out, kind of like the background, the teaching, and some of the tools. And so I just think that this is a very good model for school districts or anybody to just keep in mind.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Good. And just before I leave the ethnic studies thing, we have to even unpack the notion of ethnic studies, because the thing is, there is ethnicity being studied in our schools. The question is whose ethnicity is considered and whose is not. Whose is considered mainstream and normalized, and whose gets brought in on special days. So even that, changing that concept. Yeah. Okay.
Which reminds me of your book,
Beyond Heroes and Holidays.
Beyond Heroes and Holidays.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yes.
All right, Diana.
Yes, thank you. So if I understood you correctly, Dr. Lee, in terms of my specific question, I would begin with having the students, in fact, share what they consider racist practices in order to get a common understanding from them. So actually hearing what they have to say.
Yes.
And then having them, I would think, since I would imagine there's going to be a lot, then have them prioritize what is doable, for instance, at this time, this school year, given the conditions we're in with COVID. And then from them, am I on the right track there?
Yes, I would, again, just start with their experience, their understanding, their definition of, and move along with that. And because we're in a setting, schools, we have the tools of writing, reading, drawing, as workable tools. You know what I mean? What I'm trying to get at is that the tools of literacy are effective tools in organizing and addressing racism, right? Kids, so you are building on the skills that are needed, research skills, digging into it, finding out how many, the literacy, the math literacy of how grave the problem is. So my point is that you can get the organizing happening by using the tools, the skills that students are supposed to be learning to use. Only you're not having them applied just willy-nilly, but they're being applied to something that matters. Okay, that's how I would do it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And so our last participant is going to be Dr. Noni Reese.
Yes.
And Dr. Reese is a professor with San Jose State University in their PhD program. She also has an extensive background in social justice work and also teaches in LEAP. So welcome, Noni.
Thank you. Enid, I am intrigued by your mentioning history, because you and I have talked about this, the importance of having a historical perspective. And I'm wondering at what point, or do you think, if, for instance, in our work with leaders, we do want to teach the history of colonialism and settler colonialism that has contributed to our systemic inequities.
Yes.
Do you think, and I recently heard Ramon Crosuvel at Berkeley, who spoke about the 5 countries that have really been responsible for knowledge in the world, UK, Germany, Italy, white countries, right? Who represent only really 5% of humanity, but they are responsible for what we consider knowledge. At what point do you think it's appropriate, or do you think to have teachers work on that and then have that taught to kids?
Yes, and Noni, you and I have had long conversations about this, and yes, I would say we need it to be both. We need a two-pronged approach, at least a two-pronged approach, where there is clear focus courses on on the impact of social systems like colonialism, the racism, and the impact on education history and its responses, how it has been shaped by those systems, right? We have talked sometimes about how so much of educational theory seems removed from a historical context. Asa Hilliard says, without history, there is no real theory. So I think definitely building the history into that theoretical position arose out of this political and economic context. That's why we have it, as whatever it is. Even how we assess students, what has that got to do with the market? What has that got to do with the Industrial Revolution? That kind of thing. I think that should be clear courses, and then it needs to be inserted into whatever we are talking about, and recent history, less recent history, but history nevertheless. And your point about the 5 countries that have shaped so much, I like to have what I call the 4 M's, where where history from a whole range of other people been missing, or it's been marginalized, or it's been misrepresented. And what we are stuck with is a very meager mainstream, keeping with the M's. The mainstream ideas are meager because all of those other people are missing. And a way that I found helpful to get into it is just to ask questions like, who else was doing that? Who else has done this? Or what forms has it taken with Indigenous people? Whatever we're talking about, parenting, parent relations, dealing with the environment, whatever it is. Education, how have different civilizations transmitted knowledge to the younger ones? And say, we don't mean only Greece and Rome. We mean Asia, Africa, the indigenous people, and so forth. I find that that's a way to bring. And by using words like what else and who else did, it doesn't push those things that are on the table off the table. It just moves them to their appropriate position in the conversation. They're not central anymore, but it doesn't mean they're gone, because people get worried when they think you're just kicking them out. And really all you're trying to do is just having them assume their correct place in the history of humankind. So that's how I would do it. And I know we're going to have some great work when we do that together with the administrators. Yeah. Okay.
So Enid, I have one more
okay.
question before you move on, and that is from John Harrell. And he says, can we carefully determine the difference between racism and bias?
Oh, yes. I'd love to do that. I would say that, let me talk about bias. I actually do not like the word bias being used without an indication of what your bias is. The word bias properly means your leaning, your tendency. That's what the word really means. And the point is that we have tendencies and leanings of all kinds. So I would prefer, instead of people saying that this is biased, I would say, this is my bias, explaining to you what it is, that my bias is an anti-racist bias, that my bias is geared on valuing each human being and every community that they come from equally. That's my bias, what I want to do. My bias is redressing wrongs. My bias is dealing with the needs. So bias, I would prefer to think of whatever the leaning is. And to me, it would be helpful if we taught students, instead of saying something is bias, just say, what is the bias of this writer? And bias having a purer meaning. So that's Enid's preference. And in fact, I wrote some time ago that we usually say something is biased if we don't agree with the bias. That's usually what happens. So that's the leaning. In terms of racism, it's very clearly a system, which is can be connected to a racist bias, but it's clearly a system that operates in a whole range of ways that deny opportunity, that attribute value, that limit people's life chances and so forth, and enhances others. So I like to think of racism as a doing word, I think, I mean, I know racism is a noun, but I like to think of it as a word where there's a process involved, where you actually can see it being structured in the way in which resources are given in schools and with schools, the way in which time is devoted to professional learning and what people learn about. That's a doing piece. And then, of course, there's the overall systemic question of white supremacy, where that which is connected with whiteness, and I'm making a difference between white people and whiteness, but all the things that have to do with that civilization and way of being, where that is prioritized. And when you think about it as an action, you can get your hands around it. Don't know if that helps. Is it John?
John.
John, does that get anything closer to it? Where is he? I can't see him. Maybe he's gone. Is he done? Have we lost him?
No, I'm here. Thank you. Thank you for your insight on.
Okay.
It. That was refreshing to hear. And I wanted to touch a little bit about bias, and I think it's important that we all recognize that those are implemented in us as human beings.
Okay. Yeah.
Every single one of us has some sort of bias registered in our brains, and it's also something that we need to discuss as human beings, as why we think the way we think about each other.
Yeah.
And if we do that, we can discover different topics of interest. We can come to a table and have a discussion to understand these bias, whether they be the regular bias or whether they be implicit bias,
right,
that just been scattered all across the country and all across the world, from nation to nation, and recognizing the fact that there are some biases that transform into racism. That's my personal opinion on it.
And some of them come out of the racist system, right? And
Yes,
and the way to have that conversation about a bias that person is just to say, tell me about it. Tell me what has led you to think that, what has happened, and take it from there, right? And then ask, is this really what we want to do? But that conversation has to happen. And all of this work that's happening around implicit bias, my view on implicit bias, we have to make the bias explicit. Like if somebody says, Enid, I want you to come and do implicit bias, I say, listen, I want to make whatever bias is implicit, I want to make it explicit and link it to systems, because that way we can address what's going on. So, okay.
And one other point to that, we can't be afraid to engage in conversation.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of people that are walking the planet that are afraid to engage in conversation. Don't be afraid to talk to me because I'm a Black man, and I shouldn't be afraid to be talking to you because you're Latino, white, or Asian, what have you.
Yeah.
I can learn from you just as much as you can learn from me.
Yeah. And that fear has been cultivated historically, because a way of controlling people was to make it clear that it was not in your interest to be supportive and connected, and we have to challenge that. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead with a few more of the slides that I hope will get us closer to, yes. Okay, so to address some of the things that have just come up, we must also, to get to the anti-racist part, we have to consider equity. That's a key piece. Equity is the path to justice. Racial equity is the path to racial justice. And it means doing different things to address and redress the wrongs, the gaps, the inequities that have been there. That's plain and straight, which means that different people and different groups of people have to be dealt with differently because they have not been allowed onto the same playing field, whether we're teaching, whether it's a curriculum that we have inherited and that excludes whole groups of students, whether it's a way of assessing students that doesn't tap into the knowledge that they have from their communities and their homes, whether it's a whole group of people whose culture we have ignored to our detriment. Sometimes when I think about the knowledge that is available, was available about the fire control of the forest, of the woods amongst indigenous people, and because the superiority of those who settled here felt that they did not have to pay attention to what those who were here had to say, those things are ignored. And you can do it right across the world. We also do it too in schools. I have heard a lot of conversation about learning loss. during the pandemic and distance learning. And it would be very foolish for me to sit here and say there is no learning loss. Of course there's learning loss, but you know what? Learning is also taking place. And the first thing that should happen is honoring what it is the children have learned while they haven't been with us. And you know why we haven't thought about that as much? Is because those students are seen often to come from homes where there is nothing to learn, where there is no community wealth, where there is no value. And so whenever I'm working with teachers and they say to me, there's this learning loss, I said, yes, there is learning loss, but I want you to go back and find out what the kids have learned from whoever they've learned it from during this time. Yesterday, I was talking with a group of teachers who said that they are wondering how their students have fared without in-school suspension for 9 months. And they are saying they don't think they're going to bring it back when they come, because as far as they know, these children seem to have managed to control themselves and do what needs to be done. So you might wonder, what's that got to do with racism? But you know what that has to do with racism? That says that certain ways of being are not considered. Certain cultures of people of color, cultures of those who are non-European are seen to have nothing to offer, and we need to change that. That's racism, and that has a lot to do with the gaps in opportunity and achievement. It also has to do with how people feel about being in school. So I'm just putting that. Equity means filling those gaps in our system, not filling the gaps in the children, but filling the gaps in how we conduct ourselves and run our schools and our universities. And then when they're filled with the appropriate things, people will flourish. Okay, so moving along. Why is it resisting me? Okay, right. So just so you can know, equity is the approach and equality is the goal. So equity is the work, and equality has to do with when we see people from the range of human backgrounds, from the various racial groups, racialized groups really, when those people are in decision making, when those people have no fear of each other, when those people have a voice and are present, when those people are not fearing for their lives because of the color of skin. That's what equality looks like. So equality is the status of being valued highly, protected, cared for, elevated. And we do that in schools. Now let me get to these cards that have been threatening to do it. And before I leave that, let me say that equity allows us to see hidden assets, right? Because racism hides the assets. Racism hides the knowledge of groups of people based on race, based on civilization, based on culture. And equity, the approach that has to do with redressing wrong, it recognizes hidden assets. It addresses unequal treatment. It ensures equality. It creates opportunity. And those are the things that lead to the achievement. These cards that I keep threatening to use, let me get on with them. It's not, okay? Yeah, all right. So yes, and in the process of change, here is what we know. I've certainly found this in the work I've done, the 4 A's, that awareness of history, of systems, of assets, of the nature of racism is an ongoing piece. And when you begin to build that awareness, you can take action, right? You can take action on how we work with the parents who are hesitant and resistant to the ideas we have. How do we talk with the board members around ethnic studies, giving them a historical perspective, giving them a sense of what it would be like if all students had a full and conscious accounting of who's in this country. And I'm just touching on that because I remember that one of the things that happened in Arizona, that it was considered unpatriotic to have ethnic studies. In fact, that word is being thrown about, that we're engaging in unpatriotic education in order to uncover the racist history of this country. We're not engaging in unpatriotic education. We are engaging in sharing the truth and equipping students to liberate themselves and each other from the grasp of racism. We have to redefine things. When people incorrectly define the work we do, we need to redefine it. And so this is what we are about. This is what we're about. And we need to link it to the things that the system says it's about. Like every group, every school, every place I've ever worked says we want all children to succeed, right? And when you say that, you can say with the ethnic studies, with the Black Lives Matter, whatever it is, this is making sure that everybody is in the picture. So awareness is one piece. The action is what we engage in those small pieces. And then the analysis of what is done, what's learned. So when we come back with our pilot after ethnic studies, Black Lives Matter, or the youngsters who are engaged in actively challenging racism, that's the analysis piece. And that's when we see the attitude shifts. Oftentimes we start with the attitude shift. We say, oh, this person needs to have their attitude adjusted, right? I've done work for the last 35 years where people have been sent to Enid Lee's workshops to have their attitudes adjusted. And you can imagine what fun we have had with that, because who likes having their attitude adjusted? When, on the other hand, we begin with the awareness piece and we work towards trying it, where we work towards analyzing it, then attitudes shift, you know? So that's part of the process I use. And now, the short account I'm going to give to you, and I'm moving along quickly because I know we have need more time. These cards I was telling you about, that's one card on the preparation, and the card says, how can I link this lesson to my major goal as a teacher? And you might say, but Enid, that question doesn't overtly have anything to do with racism or anti-racism. One of the things I want to say to you is that the way to get the topic on the table is to begin with that which is personal and that which matters to the person you're speaking to. That's one thing. And also to use language that is very everyday and very much connected to the work we're doing. So that is in the package. How can I link this lesson to my major goal as a teacher? That's on the face of it a simple question, but it's also a high level question because it talks about your purpose. It talks about why you are doing this work. It talks about why you're getting up every day to come to this place. Why are you doing this, right? And that entry point is one that can lead you to equity and anti-racist practice. So I was with a group of teachers last year where we were working on using these cards. And I said, pick one, because that's the way you work with the cards. There's no right one in preparation. You just pick one that appeals to you. Pick one that has some resonance. So this teacher picked that one. And as we talked about it, as she talked about it, you know, she is a history teacher. And she was thinking about why she teaches history and how she teaches it. So just start with that. Why are you doing this? Why are you here? And take it from there. Nothing about race necessarily will come up. But once you get to that, you go to another level. As she was thinking about it and doing her work, the whole question about language and creating a climate of inclusivity and a positive tone came up. And that card is in the teaching section, okay? So because she's thinking about her larger purpose, this card seemed to make some sense to her. And she was thinking about it, and you notice we have gender, culture, faith, race, everything here, right? And if you, for instance, pick this because you're concerned about students who are special education placements, right? Perceived ability, and I deliberately use the word perceived because sometimes the ability is present, but we have not measured it correctly. So I'm thinking of another teacher who said he likes this card because it makes him think about special education, okay? And you might think, well, how do we link special education and race? One of the things I encourage, all of those identity pieces can be connected with race, because when you look at who is in special education placements in this country, they are disproportionately students of color. So while you may enter on the point with abilities, you also can get to the question of race. Another day, I was talking with an administrator who said that he thinks about gender, and he thinks about the way in which women, teachers, are expected to do duties that men don't even have to consider. They just expect to be served, right? And he was speaking about white women in his school. So I let him press forward on that and said, yes, you need to look and see how that's working in your school and what you can do with it. And then I said, and then I want you to put the lens of race on top of that question of gender and see if there is a differentiation there in terms of what Latinas, African Americans, Asian Americans, indigenous people, the South Asian, West. Just think about it. So whatever one you enter on, put the lens of race over it, right? That's how that card works. So for instance, you may be concerned with language, bilingual education. Well, yes, we have a right to make sure that students have their home languages valued and so forth. And I also want to say that this whole conversation about bilingual education in this country would not have the shape it had if the language we were speaking about was Spanish that came from Spain, or it was a Europeanized context. So our linguistic choices and our responses to them have to do with the speakers of those languages and what race they're in. I remember in Massachusetts, someone said to me, you know, I'm so glad my school is dealing with bilingualism, but what a pity it has to be Spanish. So I said, well, why is it a pity? They said, well, look at who speaks Spanish. Just a bunch of thugs, right? So you see how race and class can interact. So I said, well, whose language do you think they should be learning? Oh, they said, well, something like Russian or something else. So my point is that wherever you enter the conversation, you can put the lens of race and get people to go deeper with what they say. So this teacher, she asked herself the question about why she was teaching. And then, what's going on here? Something is, we could not complete your purchase. I don't know what that is about. So, and then when she got back to school, her students asked her, where had you been on Fridays? They came to me on Fridays for the workshop. And because she had established a good relationship with the kids, the high school students, grade 10 students, they said, well, Miss, where do you go on Fridays? And she told them that they go to this equity anti-racist training. And she told them about what all the slides that I showed with race and difference and gaps and all of that. And the students said to her, well, why did you become a teacher? What is your reason since you chose that card? And she told her some highfalutin thing about, you know, helping critical thinkers and all of that. And the student looked around the room and said, but you have all of these pictures of presidents up here in the front of the class. Did you become a history teacher in order to look at presidents every day? Are you a history teacher because you just like looking at presidents? She said, no. And the student said, well, then what we should have in front here are the kind of things that they're talking about at your Friday workshop. It should be about the history that ordinary people do and that presidents are credited for. That's what the kid got from this exchange. So a question about thinking, critical thinking, opening up the world, making knowledge wider. That's what the teacher is wanting to do. The student showed her that they was somewhat limited in what she was actually doing in terms of having the presidents. And the students got together and made the following 3 posters, which then were, I don't think they replaced the presidents, but the presidents were moved over to the side so that these 3 posters could be present. So this is a poster that they made. History. So the children, the students asked, who has done the work before me? So they're thinking historically now of people doing the work and not things happening just because presidents say they should happen. That's a different understanding of history. That's people's history, right? Ordinary people. And you can see some of the people that she has in the picture. She has Gandhi and she has the young ones like herself. So they made a poster say, we should put this up alongside the presidents because we do the people, ordinary people like our parents and us do the work, people of color. Then they did another poster which said, where are we? Oh, let me. Yes. It says, Ask yourself, how can my work better myself, my community, and my world, right? And then the other one that I missed was, who has done this work before me? I missed this one. I missed this one. Who has done this work before me? Oh, keep missing. Who has done this work before me? She's missing one. The one that I seem to be avoiding, about what's left for me to do. That was the work. That was the other poster they asked. So they asked 3 posters. They made 3 posters. Who has done this work before me? What's left for me to do? And how can I work to make my community and the world better? Now, I consider that simple card, which was, how does this lesson connect with my goal as a teacher? That nobody knew that that's where it would go. But this is what I mean about these cards. The questions are open. The questions are big. And if you frame them in history, in equity, and questions of power and people's activism, you can get to this. Just to be clear, this is a grade 10 class where all of the kids got together and did these posters and began to transform what a history class could be about. Okay? And connecting with the ethnic studies thing, that's the kind of thing that could feed into an ethnic studies program, because it would be the history of work and effort and energy by people of color who are left out of the curriculum. So I just wanted to say that that's something that can happen with the cards. And I know that there are more cards, but I want to give you that example, right? And I'm going to stop so that we can have some more questions, because I know we're running out of time. Okay, so I'll stop sharing.
While we're looking for questions in the chat and hands raised, could you turn on a light?
Me?
Can't see you any longer.
Oh, yes, I'm in total darkness, right? Yeah.
Okay, if you could type your questions in the chat.
Is that better? Yeah.
And also raise your hands. We'll be glad to start.
Yeah. Okay. So, all right. Thanks for telling me that I was sitting in the darkness. I didn't intend to be, but yeah. Questions, thoughts, reactions, responses. Come on, let's hear it. Oh, no one? No question? No questions. Adora, is anyone there?
I do not see any hands raised yet.
Did everyone leave or what? There can be comment. Well, let me ask a question. Who has used the cards? And if you have, could you share how you've used them? That might be. Let me throw that out, because I know some folks have questions.
We do have Leslie Ann Noel.
Oh yes.
History. She's actually crediting you. That history example was wonderful.
Okay, thank you, Leslie Ann. I know your mom well, and I'm very happy you came along. Perhaps you can tell us a little bit about your work.
Hi, and I have children one child playing in the background who might jump in.
Good. Yeah.
But my mother told me about your work and about your cards. I'm a designer, and I'm also in a space of anti-bias, because in design we tend to focus on dominant culture and let's make the product for the best market and whatnot. And I'm actually literally at this point writing an article about how these biases that we talk about are actually an illusion. When we talk about let's focus on the 80% and things like that, it's really that kind of exclusionary trigger that we sometimes hear in the business world is really an illusion. And actually, if we cater for more people and create greater access, more people benefit. I don't actually even know how to make the case properly, but listening to your talk has been very helpful in me framing my article right now.
Oh, good. I'm glad. Well, listen, here's one thing that can get them to widen their scope without getting their backs up, at least because you have to get them to widen it, and then they can take their back up. But I found when I say who else who else could be included, or what else could be considered? Because it doesn't push what they're saying out of the way. It broadens the potential, And of course, if we're going to put more things in, then maybe what they wanted might be somewhat less. It would change the shape of it. But I have found that is very helpful. That's the way I have maneuvered in education. Whenever I want something to be more inclusive, I ask, who else can we consider in addition to, along with, plus? The word "and" for me is very important because it includes more, and it reimagines what we have on the table, because there's a limit to what you can put. You know what I mean? And even when people say, well, we have had this it's been like this all along, right? And I would say, and now it seems as if it's a time for someone else's turn. I use words that reasonable people find reasonable, because turn taking is something we have been taught to do. And there is an opening when we take a turn. There's an opening that is possible to get something in that wasn't there before. Do you know what I'm saying? And I think that is helpful. It doesn't always work, but those are some of the taglines I've used when I'm getting in. Like I try to avoid yes/no questions. So for instance, these questions that I'm on the cards, someone in Texas took it upon themselves to change all the questions to yes/no and sent it back to me to say that they thought this was an improvement on what I had done. But of course, one takes these things with a smile. And I said, well, that's interesting. Let me tell you why I did it the way I did it. Because none of those questions allow yes or no. They allow you, they ask what entry point, like how far and to what extent. It builds on assets. It says, let's go with the piece that's there and reimagine it and reshape it. You know what I mean? So I would say, to working with people in a district, don't go to the district and ask, can we do such and such? Say, to what extent can we include student voice, right? So you have put student voice on the table. They might say, to no extent, but at least you have raised it, that you have pushed the boundaries of where people have thought they should stop, right? And that is not what we need to be doing differently. Like this going back to the Black Lives Matter thing. Parents think all lives should matter. Yes, we think so. And all lives will only matter when Black lives matter. So we're on the same page, but this is what it needs. And why we have to bring it up is because it hasn't been mattering. It hasn't mattered. And the numbers of the deaths and the what have you. That's how I bring it. And not necessarily expect that people agree with it once, but we've got to start with that. That pushing forward, that naming what we say we want done. Do you know? So, okay.
So Enid, I have to let everyone know that Enid has studied linguistics. So when she says to use these words, she is a master at using language. And so if you are around her for a long time, you begin to speak like her, which is a great thing, believe me. So Julia, you had your hand up, and so I wonder if you still have your comment or question.
Which Julia is this?
Julia Cook.
Oh, okay. I think that name is familiar. Yeah.
Julia muted.
Julia.
Yes. Hi. Hi there. So nice to see so many of you. I was just commenting that I have used your cards as well with the teach. Yes.
How have you used them, Julia?
So when I was mentoring teachers in the classroom, I used them as sentence starters, kind of, and thought-provoking, as we were, talking about their lesson and kind of doing a deep dive into equity. I would just throw it out there and say, what do you think about this? Or have them choose one to talk about. So it was really just a conversation starter. And what I really liked is that you could use them with any teacher, whatever grade level they were teaching or subject area.
Well, I'm very glad to hear that, because I never know how people use it. Some people have told me that they have taken the questions and given them to middle and high school students. So they will give them feedback on how it's going. And then they will look at how it's breaking down in responses in terms of race, in terms of class, in terms of language. So they know who they're meeting, who they know who they're addressing, who they are redressing the gaps that are in the system. And so that's great. I love that. Yeah. So yes. Okay, we have a few minutes more, and I'd like to, Adora, I think I'd better get back, right? To
Yes, that's fine.
Yes, because we have to go soon. Yeah, that's okay. So that's one thing that happened with the cards. Then let me just say I have 3 more slides that I'll point to that will help. Yeah, let me see here. Yes, so I have 8 steps that help you institutionally to address racism. Identify the inequity and its human-made roots. And the important word in that sentence is human-made roots, because so often when we see injustice, we say, oh, that's just the way it is. And I push us to ask, what are the historical conditions? What are the contemporary conditions that have led to this situation? These things were not created at the beginning of time. Injustice is an unnatural condition, unnatural. It is created by the way in which we have organized our society, our schools, our thinking, okay, where power has resided. So one of the things that happen, just a quick example in one of the cards, when we have students who are migrant students and are coming at different times of the year because of the agricultural realities of their families, and they have to miss school and all that sort of thing, we can leave them out altogether, or we can arrange our classrooms in a way that allow them to enter where they come and when they come. And I want to say that I've seen it done where teachers got things set up, and when new people come, students are the people who invite them in, get them started while the teacher gets the rest of the class going. And they make it that when you come, you don't feel like a foreigner, you don't feel like an alien, you don't feel unwelcome. And that system is something that somebody thought through. It matches the system that isn't in existence in terms of immigration. All of these systems can reflect a pattern of exclusion, or they can reflect a pattern of inclusion. And when I say human-made roots, I mean it. Just ask, how did this come to be? How is it that these families are never here? How is it they don't feel invited? How is it that these people don't apply for our district to get work? How is it that they're never on any committees? How is it? Who does it? And when we find that out, we can change it. And name the social group experiencing the inequity. So don't just say a couple of kids. What do we notice about the kids? Gender, race, class, connections to people in high office at the board. Who are we talking about? Get the data to support the claim. We're talking about the 7 students at the back of the class who are Latinos, who are African Americans, who are whatever, and when I say whatever, I should even correct myself. I don't know if you noticed that, perhaps you don't know this, or perhaps I found out that in the recent election, when they were categorizing who voted exit polls, the indigenous people were clumped in as something else. That there was African American, there was Asian, and then there was something else, and they were included in that. And we need to not be just having people in groups as something else. Who are they? How do they call themselves? And what are their realities? So those kinds of naming the group. Linking the inequity to the goal of equality, which is what I was saying there, where people say they want everyone included, right? And this is why in doing anti-racist work, I have never had any school say to me, why are you bringing that up? Because what I do, I look at what they say their mission is, their goal is, the district's goal, and the goal is we want all students to succeed, right? So then I say, well, let's take a look at who is not being well served here, right? And that's why I'm having this conversation with you. Because to get to the all, we have to go to the parts. And even historically, when I've done work in universities, I remember talking to a university president, and I said, well, when can you tell me of something your university has done that has addressed the question of social injustice and exclusion? And he looked at me and he said, this actually was a Canadian example. He said, oh, in the I think he said the mid 19th century. And I said, well, I'm looking for something a bit more recent, right? But my point was that I would take anything he gave me, anything, and push him from there. And that's the approach. Any hint of enthusiasm, energy, effort, maximize it. I've never worked in a school where people have said to me, I don't want to go to the next level. I work in schools where it's the festival, folklore, and feast, that celebratory aspect of culture. And when they do that, I don't say to them, you should be ashamed to be doing that. I said, oh, so you have done this, which means that you're ready for the next level. And no one has ever said to me, I don't want to go to the next level. They say to me, what is the next level? And we move from there. I'm just telling you these things because over these 35 years, that's the way I have managed to nudge people in institutions to look at the wrongdoing of racism, white supremacy, and the way it dehumanizes us. And it's ongoing work, because it doesn't mean that you've got the problem solved. And then the next phase, which is, I'll rush through that, setting goals so that you know where this is going to be changed, so that when we look at who is working here and who is speaking at meetings and what funds are being devoted to which schools, when the ethnic studies thing is introduced, how is that going to look? When we have got parents have a deeper understanding of the Black Lives Matter, that, then look at the most important action to address inequity, address it in whatever systems you have under your control, whatever arrangements you have. And most important, join with others to work on it, because it's a collaborative approach. Nobody is going to uproot institutionalized racism on their own. It will not happen. It is ongoing. It needs all of us. There will be setbacks. But once we realize what we are working on, it's the humanization of all of us. It is unleashing the humanity of feelings, or intelligence, or creativity, or dreams, or hopes, all the things that people deserve to have for being human, but are denied in some cases because of the color of their skin, or the language they speak, or the country they come from, because those are placeholders also for race. Oftentimes people don't actually say what race they're talking about, but you know that they're not talking about folks from the dominant group. And everybody has a role to play in this, because as Phyllis Jones says, in the end, it wastes resources and it limits us. This is my final slide. It's a word wall. And if you notice, I have 3 words on it. 3 or 4? Yeah, 3. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they're endowed by the Creator. That word all is in almost every mission statement or brochure or anything that I've seen in any institution I've worked in. So I go for that. And I remind us this is what we're doing and why we're doing anti-racist work. Because if you don't address racism, if you don't constantly take those systems that produce racist outcomes that deny people, then you're never going to get to the all. I also like to think of the word and, not all. It's, as I was saying, that when they say, we're doing this and it's done, say, and let's also include such and such, and, as opposed to this or that, but this and that. And then yet is the word I use, which says that the work is still in the future. And when you use the word yet, you are indicating that you intend to do something about it, because there's no point in saying, I haven't finished it yet, if you don't plan to lift a finger. So I am always looking at how we can push that work ahead, and that if it hasn't been accomplished yet, it's not we're not giving up on it. We're not giving up on it, because it is the task of anyone who wants to have that liberty and happiness and so for themselves to engage in this work using some of these simple tools that we have talked about. I know it's after the hour. Yes, a little bit after the hour, but I wanted just to share those with you, the cards, the framing, some of the experiences, and to invite you to share yours. So that's my piece, and I don't know if I should stop sharing probably, yeah? Yeah. And I don't know if there is more or
So we'd
more
like to
questions.
thank everyone for coming because we have gone over.
Yes.
And so we will stay on for another 10 minutes or so if people would like to stay and ask questions. We will have one more conversation with Enid in the spring. So look for that advertising on that conversation for the date. And we welcome you all to come back and attend. If you would like to get in touch with Enid, we will post her email contact in the chat. Selena, if you could take care of that. Enid also has a website that you could go to. And actually, if you Google Enid's name, her website comes up and you can go and ask questions there. You can also purchase the cards on Enid's website as well. So we thank you for coming. We also want to welcome you to our next conversation in the spring, and also encourage you to go to Enid's website, which is posted in the chat, and to purchase the cards and begin to try to use them between now and our next conversation. And then that way, when you come to that conversation, you'll be able to ask questions and more authentic questions about the use of the cards. But we will stay on for 10 more minutes for other questions.
I'd just like to say thank you to a lot of people I'm now seeing in the room. Lots of friends, colleagues, Anna Marie, Marcella, Victor. Oh my goodness, they all came out. I'm glad to see everyone. I just don't want to miss anyone because I don't want people to stop speaking to me because I haven't said hello. I know they won't think that, but I can't see everybody. But it's good to see so many people I've traveled with and who I know. New Haven Unified School District, Irene McGinty. Oh my goodness, Diana. Oh yes, Claudia Harvey from Trinidad and Tobago. Yeah, wonderful to see you. Yeah, wonderful to see all of you. Very, very glad.
So Enid, before we go off altogether, John Harrell did put a question in the chat.
Where is it?
Which refers to your conversation around history. And he said, with reference to the cards and history, how long do we need to discuss the history in order to get to the future?
Okay.
John, if you want to expand on that, please.
Yes, yes. So I would say that I actually start from the present. I start from the present to get to history, to the future. And by that I mean students don't have to wait for till they know all the history. The interest in history is triggered when we're looking at something that we would like to change, like Diana's students with the engaging in activism. So this is the situation we're in. So we're looking back to see who has done this work before, like the student said. And at one of the slides, I think I didn't see, and it says, and which piece is left for me to do? And that's a good piece that gets you right into the present and the future. So the three questions were, who has done this work before, so I can learn from history? Which piece is left for me to do, which means this is my moment to make a new history, to insert myself into the way things should be in the world with my colleagues, my peers. And of course, that then leads us to the future that we want to have. So the future is now in many ways. The past is now in many ways, because once we start with where students are and what they would like to see happen, we look back to learn and we look to see what we can do to make the future happen, and we're there. So I am definitely not one for saying you can't move until you have all the history down. I would say you link it to where you're at present. Yes.
Okay, so we also have comments about asking how we could invite you to come out and speak to our schools. Enid's website address is in the chat. It's enidlee.com.
Yeah.
If you go there, you can actually message her directly, and she will get back to you. We will also, if you're interested, give Enid your contact information, which we have your email addresses. Just email us and let us know, and we'll be glad to share your contact information.
Adora, it will come out. There will be a survey that's going to follow this. And in the survey, we do ask if we can share your information with Enid. And then if you agree to, then we will go ahead and share your contact information with her directly.
And then you can contact her directly. Thank you, Selena.
Okay. Well, thank you all for coming, and so enjoyed it. Glad to have a chance for this conversation. I'm particularly glad about the questions, and I'd love to hear more about what people are doing to get this happening in their own sites.